Without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker, Ms. Terry Ferrari, Regional Leader for East Asia World Vision International, to give introductory remarks. Ms. Terry, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And good afternoon to all of you, especially to our distinguished guests and panelists to our session. And I want to extend a very special warm welcome to our two child representatives, Ms. Bumvrika and Ms. Sohana. A very quick reminder, first of all, we have children and young people in our session, and so please do not share your contact details or any personal information as you introduce yourself. Young leaders, at any point, if you feel uncomfortable, do not hesitate to inform your adult mentor or send a direct message to any of our panelists so that we can assist you. It's probably safe to assume that most of us have a birth certificate and know the privileges that we enjoy because of it. But what concerns many of us is the impact on individuals, especially children. As we know, the lack of a birth certificate denies a child his or her identity, as well as investments in future human development. And we're here today because we understand a country cannot demonstrate its SDG achievement or progress without quality data, such as birth registration or CRVS. And for us, this is more than just statistics. It is the face of one child. And it's actually the reason why I was so excited to be able to speak here today. So 2 years ago, I attended the Asian Children's Summit here in Bangkok. And some of you may have been here as well. And you may have recalled on the final day of this session, child delegates presented their recommendations to government officials and civil society members in 4 areas. And the presentation that I remember the most was from a 16-year-old girl living in Thailand who lacked a birth certificate. And because of that, she had limited access to formal education, healthcare, and employment opportunities. And I remember how she cried as she shared what her life was like. And that not having a birth certificate denied her more than just her identity. It was so much more. And I had a similar opportunity in May of this year, listening to the experiences and recommendations of children and youth who were attending the Regional Children and Youth Forum on CRVS. 70 young people attended that session from 11 countries. And on that call, we heard from people who had stories about how a lack of a birth certificate denied their identity, lacked them access to formal services. And in one case, a young girl shared that because she couldn't get a death certificate for her father, she was unable to access a scholarship and she had to terminate her education. At World Vision, we believe birth registration is the first step to child protection. We see it as a key enabler for improving and sustaining child well-being, which is why in 2010, we started tracking birth registration as a minimum quality standard for every child that we serve. To evaluate our own progress, we conducted a comparative analysis of the results and barriers of birth registration in 7 countries. Those 7 countries were Bangladesh, Cambodia, Indonesia, India, Mongolia, Philippines, and Lanka. We saw that there were successes, especially in countries like Mongolia, where there's universal birth registration. And that's because there's a high number of births that are delivered in hospitals. Mothers tend to leave the hospital with a birth certificate. And there's actually a monthly child dividend that's delivered to each parent for each child that they have. Whereas countries like Bangladesh and India and Indonesia still have a far way to go. They struggle with small budgets and competing demands at the local government level, under-resourcing of staff and materials, a lack of capacity, training, and in some cases, there were also reports of fraud and corruption as an additional barrier. We know linking CRVS and social protection schemes is a strategic game, mandating sufficient community health workers and civil servants to help deliver The registration of birth registration is important. No big surprise. The same study found that in 2020, during the pandemic, many people were having difficulties accessing CRVS, excuse me, as well as other services. And except for all countries, we did see gaps for people with disabilities, the poorest of the poor, stateless people, single mothers, just all having difficulties accessing civil registration services. And that was compounded by geographic obstacles, costs, lack of information in local and minority languages, low literacy levels, cultural beliefs and practices, a lack of trust in the system, and excessive documentation and requirements, and most of all, exclusion. When services are free of cost and with a longer legal time limit, effects on birth registration are noticeable. Children born in a formal health facility are far more likely to get a birth certificate than those born at home. What's really important is partners working together. So whether it's community health workers, civil servants, child protection workers, faith leaders, all of them are important in promoting a positive social norm and behavior among parents and helping them prioritize the registration of newborn children. World Vision is proud to say that in 9 of the 12 countries where we track birth registration, over 95% of the children in the communities where we work have registered their births at, when they are born. We have a long way to go until we reach 100%. And we're hopeful that working with parents and caregivers, we can make it happen. And while we're working towards that, World Vision believes that children whose birth are not registered and who are without official documentation should be allowed to access services such as health and education while waiting to be properly registered. At the end, we believe that every child matters. Let's count everyone. Let's get everyone in the picture. Let's bring hope and joy and justice to all children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. That's a really terrific introduction. I would like to tell you a little bit that this session will be divided into 2 parts. In the first part, we will hear important voices from Ms. Buntarika and Ms. Sohana, as Terry pointed out earlier. Both of them are child delegates of the Regional Forum of Children and Youth on Civil Registration and Vital Statistics in Asia and the Pacific, which was held on 29 May this year. Let's start with Ms. Buntarika, a 14-year-old student from Thailand. She will tell us from child's perspective why it's important for children to be included and consulted on the issue of birth, marriage, and death registration. Ms. Buntarika, please take the floor.
Hello everyone, my name is Buntarika Artik from Thailand. Why is it important for children and youth to be included on issues of birth, marriage, death registrations? In my opinion, it is because in my opinion, it is because children and youth in my opinion, it is because children and youth now are adult in the future. As we have knowledge of these issues, when we are in the positions of providing information to others, it would be great for sharing with correct information flow. I would like to participate this concerning. I want to learn and resist knowledge. This is not taught in school. The children now are future adults who will develop the nations. It is important that they learn to use it in the future or when they encounter problems. It is a sole guideline for younger generations or grandchildren to learn about these issues. Additionally, birth certificate is important because it reflects the basic information about our identity and is the first document which makes governments and other organizations recognize us as citizens. The birth certificate is very important for us because it shows our relationship with our parents. Certificate is human right. The birth certificate is important because it is useful for many purposes of sharing. Birth certificate is very important in the different state of our life to be recognized as citizens and access the different service of the government access the different service. It is required for us to experience different opportunity important for our development and for us to have better life. Our birth certificate allow us to access to service provided by hospital school such as scholarships for educations to be able to have a job includes our dream job. Even marriage certificates are important for us because their wish are required when even someone is applying for birth certificate. The marriage certificate of the parents of a child are amongst primary documents required for the certifications of childbirth. And marriage certificate are important for women experience harassment at home, such as domestic violence and wanting divorce. The registration of marriage will have government and other people know case of arranged marriage, and this data is important for the government to prevent child marriage. Finally, birth, marriage, and death certificate are human rights, and I call on our government and informations to acknowledge this right of every child and youth. I also encourage every adult members of our society to acknowledge this right of every child and youth wherever they are located in the world. Also, are adults to conscious these recognitions for everyone in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Buntarika. Thank you for pointing out the importance of all this legal documentation based on children and youth experience. I think it's really important. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Sohana, a 13-year-old student from Pakistan. She will share with us more about key challenges experienced by children, youth, and their family in birth, marriage, and death registration. Ms. Sohana, the floor is yours.
Good morning and assalamu alaikum to all of you. This is me, Sohana Habib from Pakistan. I am 13 years old, learning in grade 8. I considered myself a human rights advocate after attending training of child trainers organized by Group Development Pakistan. I am a Human Resource Child and Youth Task Force member of Group Development Pakistan. I also participated in the country consultation and regional forum of children and youth on civil registration and vital statistics held in Asia and Pacific, held on 29th of May 2021. Today, I discuss some reasons that why I and my fellow children and youth delegates think that birth, marriage, and death certificates are important. First, birth certificate is important because it reflects the basic information of our identity and is the first document which recognizes us as citizens. In country consultation and regional forum, all of us, children and youth, agree that the birth certificate is the sole document which proves our identity and it is important at every stage of our life. The importance of birth certificate, we use birth certificate in every stage of our lives because it is helpful at every stage of our life. For joining a school we need it at kindergarten, we also need it for higher education, we also need birth certificate for making other important documents such as for making passports, for opening bank accounts and for getting driving license. We also need it, and it is the document which shows our relationship with our parents. And in we children and youth think that without birth certificate we cannot prove our identity, we cannot join a school. In many countries children are not allowed to go outside of their country. Without birth certificate, we cannot avail health services, and youth delegates cannot get their driving license, and they cannot open their bank accounts. And it was also discussed that later on we also face a lot of problems in getting jobs in different sectors. The third point which I want to discuss, applying for other important documents such as marriage certificate, death certificate, we also need birth certificate because these certificates are linked with each other. How? I'll tell you. For clearing my point, I want to give you an example. For if you have no birth certificate and you gonna marry, and after your marriage you want to make your marriage certificate, so you can't make your marriage certificate because you have no birth certificate, you have no proof of your identity. So from where you can make your marriage certificate? So this is the point. And as well as for making of, if people want to make your death certificate, so they also need your birth certificate. And if you are married, so they also you need your marriage certificate. So this that's why these documents are linked with each other, and we need birth certificate for making such.
Ms. Sohana, could you unmute yourself, please?
Now, okay, the fourth point which I want to discuss is that parents should be responsible for the correct and timely registration of the birth of their children. I and my fellow children and youth delegate discuss this point in country consultation and regional forum because they are facing a lot of problems in their lives. For clearing my point, I want to give an example of my own sister. When my sister was studying in class 9, so she faced a lot of problems for continuing her education because her name was written incorrectly in birth certificate as compared to the documents of school certificates. And after the great struggle and great efforts of my father, at last my sister's name was corrected, and then my sister was allowed to continue her education. So that's why in country consultation and regional forum, children and youth delegates discuss this point because they are facing a lot of problems, and parents should be responsible for the correct and timely information of their children registration. The last point and the fifth point which I want to discuss is that government should provide assistance to low income families, including the provision of correct information about the importance and process of birth registration or birth certification. At the consultations and regional forums, I learned that there are too many people who do not know from where and to whom to get their birth certificates, or to register their births. So they don't know the process of registration, and too many people in Pakistan are facing these problems. If we if we look to the village side, there are too many people who do not have any relationship with government officers, and they can't attest the birth certificate from any government because they have no relationship with any government officer. So it's the responsibility of the government to provide a government officer in offices. And there are too many people who can't give the expenses of the birth for making the birth certificate. So it is the responsibility of the government to make birth certificate without any expenses. Thank you for listening my some points. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sohana. And again, thank you, Ms. Puntarika. These are important voices that adults like us need to listen to, because we all know that they will be the one who are fighting the world with or without us. Let us continue to the second part, where we will feature the multi-sectoral collaboration, especially collaboration with local authority and community in the Philippines to improve birth registration among one of the indigenous groups, Sama Bajau, who live in remote areas in the country. Before I invited our speakers, I would like to show you a 5-minute video to give an overview of the registration situation among the Sama Bajau.
Masaya ako pag nagbo-volunteer ako kasi nakakatulong ako sa mga tao. Sabihan namin na din po sila, ma'am, na ngayon din kailangan nila na, tsaka nalaman nila na kung ano talaga yung halaga ng birth certificate. Kaya ma'am, kung may ganito na nagbibigay, sila na talaga kusang lumalapit. Yung dati ma'am, pag may nag-interview, nagtatago sila kasi natatakot. Ngayon nalaman nila na ma'am, mas mahalaga talaga yung birth certificate, kahit saan hinihingian sila na talaga mismo ang lalapit para makipag-register, humihingi sa amin ng tulong kung paano.
It address their education, okay? Kasi sa education ngayon kailangan nila ng birth certificate, no? It could also address doon sa pagkukuha sila ng PhilHealth, no? Okay, kasi kailangan ng mga birth certificate, no? Of course, doon sa pag-register natin sa COMELEC. So basically, politically, no, they can participate in because of this birth certificate.
The problem with indigenous people is that they don't have documents to support the data that they want to put in the birth, in the form itself. So what we did is to produce documents for them through witnesses, through the tribal leaders in their community who might have known, no, the event that occurred, no? And then we provide a listing of their family, so in order for the family members to be consistent in the entries as far as all the members of the family. So what we did is we created a template for them not just for them to fill it out, but at least to be verified by the community itself, no? If the entries that they indicated are more or less accurate.
Kahirapan na para marunong, kasi hindi ako marunong magsulat. Siya lang para makaturo sa akin.
Collaboration plays a vital role in the success of the registration, the pilot registration of Sama Badjao, because without the assistance of the City Civil Registrar's Office of Zamboanga City and the NCIP, and UNHCR, the project might not be a success. The issue of statelessness in the Philippines is a whole of government approach. It's a holistic approach that if only DOJ will be the sole agency to do that, it's really impossible for us to achieve something. This monumental success. We have a great population of 130,000 as of now, and hopefully as the project continues, this population, the Sama Badjao, who are considered at risk, might be eventually reduced, and the issue of their being stateless might be resolved, hopefully in time before the 2024 arrives.
Next speakers, you have already seen them in the video, and you will see them live now too. May I invite Attorney Alexander Eric Arias from City Civil Registrar Office of Zamboanga, the Philippines, to share some experience in facilitating birth registration for Sama Badjao, please. And if you could do within 7 minutes because of the time limit right now, I would be really appreciated. Thank you so much. Could you please unmute yourself, Attorney?
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Alexander Eric Elias. I'm the City Civil Registrar of Zamboanga City, Philippines, and we'll be discussing the birth registration of Sama Badjaos in Zamboanga City. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. First, we'll discuss the mandate of the civil registrars. The mandate is to carry out the civil registration program of the city. It develops plans and strategies, particularly those to do with civil registrars programs and projects. Accept all registrable documents and judicial documents affecting the civil status of persons. Transmit to the Office of the Civil Registrar General duplicate copies of registered documents, receive applications for the issuance of marriage license, and conducts educational campaigns for vital registration, assist in the demographic and other statistical information of the city. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. A civil registrar's perspective, registration among indigenous population remains a challenge, but at the same time an opportunity because it generally entails a recalibration of our thinking and a change of heart. Challenges have allowed the CCRO to go beyond the duty by making it easier for indigenous people to have births registered without settling onerous requirements. Civil Registry Department exemplifies best practices, ensuring inclusion of minorities and indigenous peoples in the domain of civil registration as part of our commitment to address statelessness and lack of documentation in Zamboanga City. Next slide, please. The Sama Bajaus, seafaring indigenous peoples group who are mostly found in Mindanao and Southeast Asia, identified as one of the populations at risk of statelessness. Philippines, due to the itinerant lifestyle, frequent border crossing, generations of non-registrations of birth. Reasons for non-registration of birth of Samabajaw, like lack of awareness on the importance of birth registry, lack of confidence to access government services, impeding basic transactions as processing the records. Processing for birth registry is an added burden for Sama Bajaus. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Birth registration of Sama Bajaus in Samanga started in 2015 in partnership with Community and Family Services International, CFSI, National Commission on Indigenous People, or NCIP, and other civil society organizations. In 2019, the UNHCR and UNICEF also provided support to the initiative in line with the implementation of UNHCR UNICEF strategy to end childhood statelessness. Identified Valley Vista Phase 1 and 2 in Barangay Kasanganyan in Zamboanga City as its focus community. The initiative demonstrates the community of Zamboanga City towards achieving the sustainable development goal agenda of leaving no one behind. As of October 2021, a total of 4,287, more or less, Sama Bajaus were provided with birth certificates. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Key stakeholders involved. Government agencies, Department of Justice, lead agency in the implementation of the NAP to end statelessness, the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, NCIP, Region 9, through its Zamboanga sub-office, and of course, the local government of Zamboanga. Civil society organizations, UN agencies, Community and Family Services International, CFSI, Silsila Dialogue Movement, UNHCR, and UNICEF. Next slide, please. The process. The first is interagency team gathers data from the Sama Bajaus. Then it is followed by partners submits NCIP personal sheet, family listing, verification slip, civil registrars, then verifies the list and returns the result to partner. Then trained volunteers preparing the form for birth registration. And then it is followed by our office, the civil registrar, evaluates and registers the birth. And of course, we submit the birth record to the Philippine Statistics Authority. The birth registration process takes time, as this includes a process where someone are required to before interview or staff from the city civil registrar's office, communication barriers between the interviewer and the Sama Bajau during the verification process, then the Sama Bajau's cultural beliefs, particularly with the names, which they tend to change according to health conditions on the individual, lack or no documentary evidences to establish the veracity of their identity, delays in the process and limitations in terms movement due to the pandemic. Next challenge. Next page, please. Next slide, please. The strengths and opportunities, the implementation of the initiative through a whole of society approach. Partners at the national, regional, local government, and community levels have already established a good working relationship with other. Participation of the Bajau community is ensured all throughout the process of implementation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Ways forward, continue to engage with agencies in the conduct of birth registration related initiative for the Samabajaus, continue birth registration amid the pandemic, expand birth registration for the Samabajaus to communities in Zamboanga City with the Samabajao population. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Anthony Eric. Now I would like to ask to hear more from another key official, State Council Melvin Suarez from Refugees and Stateless Person Protection Unit, Department of Justice, the Philippines. Melvin, the floor is yours, and if you could please do it within like 5 or 6 minutes, I would be really appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bongkot. We express our sincere gratitude and appreciation for the privilege to share the Philippines' experience in pursuing a whole of society and collaborative approach to birth registration, particularly on the government's efforts to increase birth registration coverage among the hard-to-reach populations in the country. The end goal of this challenging task is to provide legal identity for these hard-to-reach-out populations, including those at risk of statelessness, and in effect materializes the adopted declaration of leaving no one behind under the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Philippine jurisprudence has recognized that the birth certificate, more than a historical record of one's birth, is a vital marker of identity. Births are among those events required to be entered in the civil register, and the certificate of live birth or birth certificate, the vital record contained in the birth and death register, establishes the fact of birth. Philippine law on citizenship adheres to the principle of jus sanguinis, which confers citizenship by virtue of blood relationship. Thus, Philippine citizenship can be proven by a birth certificate, which offers prima facie proof of filiation, or a passport, which proves that the country which issued it recognizes the person named therein as its national. Next slide, please. Okay. The Philippines is fertile with birth registration statutes enacted in the form of acts, presidential decrees, and republic acts. Notwithstanding, challenges still remain to achieve an inclusive and accessible birth registration integrated in a broader civil registration system, particularly those marginalized and vulnerable populations in our country. Next slide, please. In adopting a whole of society approach on civil registration, Presidential Proclamation number 1106 was issued declaring the years 2015 to 2024 as civil registration and vital statistics decade, which substantially enjoined all agencies and instrumentalities of the national government and local government units in coordination with the private sector, development partners, and the citizenry to actively support all activities and programs relevant to the improvement of civil registration and vital statistics in the country. The proclamation is also aligned with the Philippines pledge during the high-level segment on statelessness to improve access of vulnerable and marginalized populations to documentation through birth and civil registration, and SDG 16.9 and the 2030 Agenda to leave no one behind. Next slide, please. In 2010-2011, the Philippine government identified 5 groups of populations at risk of statelessness. First, the persons of Indonesian descent. In 2014, a milestone project for the registration and confirmation of nationality of the PIDs, now we call them PIDs, in Southern Philippines was undertaken by the Philippine and Indonesian governments in cooperation with UNHCR under the legal framework of the 2014 Joint Commission for Bilateral Cooperation between Philippines and Indonesia. A total of 8,745 PIDs were registered under the project and eventually confirmed as a durable solution either as Filipinos, Indonesians, or dual citizens. We also identified the Sama Badjaos, the seafaring indigenous people whose risk of statelessness is caused by the generations of non-registration of birth. In 2019, a pilot birth registration initiative for the Sama Badjaos was conducted in an identified area in Zamboanga City, as earlier discussed by Attorney Elias. Next slide, please. Also at risk of statelessness in the Philippines are unregistered children, children of Philippine descent in migratory settings, which refer to unregistered children born outside of wedlock in certain countries in the Gulf region and Sabah, and foundlings. The lack of birth registration and possession of birth certificates are common denominators that place the said populations at risk of statelessness status. In 2016, however, the Philippine Supreme Court promulgated landmark decision declaring that as a matter of law, foundlings are as a class, natural-born citizens, and that all foundlings found in the Philippines are born to at least either a Filipino father or a Filipino mother and are thus natural-born, unless there is substantial proof otherwise. Further, Article 8 of the Philippine Civil Code expressly provides that judicial decisions interpreting or applying the laws or the Constitution shall form part of the legal system of the Philippines. As of November 2021, there are about 6,543 identified foundlings per data of the Philippine Statistics Authority. Next slide, please. There are two primary interagency mechanisms at the national level mandated, among others, to improve birth registration and vital statistics in the Philippines. We have an interagency committee on civil registration and vital statistics composed of different relevant agencies of the Executive Department, which seeks technical guidance from the DOJ Refugees and Stateless Persons Protection Unit, RSPPU, in integrating statelessness matters in the CRVS. The other is a technical working group on Action Point 5 of the Philippine National Action Plan to End Statelessness by 2024, which refers to ensuring birth registration to prevent statelessness. The TWG composition of government agencies is broader than the IEC CRVS and diverse in its consideration of the identified at-risk populations. One of the TWG's objectives is coordinating with the IEC CRVS for policy direction and guidance in addressing statelessness issues in the country. The IEC CRVS and the NAP-TWG are closely collaborating with the local civil registers who are actually mandated by law to conduct birth registration and to issue birth certificates as credible proof of Philippine citizenship. The Philippines is also pleased to share existing good practices on birth registration, like waiver of fees, penalties, and other charges in cases of delayed birth registration, including correction of clerical errors of interest in birth certificates, as experienced in the PID project, the close engagement and the pilot delayed birth registration for the Sama Badjaos, and the policy of the house-to-house free mobile birth registration at the barangay level and in the far-flung communities and hard-to-reach populations. Next slide, please. The Philippine government has also consistently collaborated with the UNHCR, civil society, non-government organizations, academe, among others, in ensuring birth registration of all children, especially in geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas. Final slide, please. Finally, the Philippine government's efforts to reach out to the private sector are demonstrated with its engagement, specifically with UNICEF, in the digitization of the registration of vital events and the partnership of Pilipinas Teleserve and PSA Service with regard to online request and delivery of PSA issued civil registration documents. That ends my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Attorney Melvin. We always in place by the initiative and good practices from the Philippines. Last but not least, I would like to invite Dr. Matthias Preuss, Senior Statelessness Officer, UNHCR Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific, to give concluding remarks, please.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank everybody among the speakers for the brilliant contributions and the opportunity to really learn a lot through listening to your experiences. And special thanks, of course, go to Ms. Buntarika and Ms. Sohana for sharing your personal experiences. I just want to be very brief to focus on a few key takeaways from these sessions, from this session, and I think the first one would be 3 points only about the child and youth participation in civil registration. I think what we've seen again today, what we've already known, but which is really strongly emphasized, it is important to include children and youth in the design and in the discussion of civil registration practices. They know their needs, they should be heard. It's also been re-emphasized that birth registration is the first step towards child protection, to facilitate access to health, education, livelihoods, all other rights of children that are linked to that. So really, birth registration is the first step, the clue towards, the key towards child protection. And I think a third last conclusion or key takeaway on child and youth participation is that, as both Buntarika and Sohana have shown us, it's not only a legal question, it's really about social and psychological dimensions of identity. And I think that's really something we all should always keep in mind. Few quick takeaways, what I retain from those brilliant presentations from the Philippines. We have seen that the lack of registration and documentation is not only an abstract risk factor of statelessness, it's a real root cause of statelessness. And so the Philippines have been very successful in addressing this root cause. And I think there's three points that I retain from our session today that I would like to re-emphasize. Firstly, we need a cooperation between all branches and all levels of government. So national action plans can be an appropriate tool. Where documents are missing, then governments develop flexible approaches towards how to address the lack of documentation. But either way, the efforts must be a whole of government approach that really involves the local and the central level and parliament as well as the executive sector. Second key takeaway, especially from the video that we have seen, civil society volunteers play a crucial role. I mean, without the help of community activists, I think it would be very difficult to really achieve those goals. We have also heard that the private sector contributed. So I think what we learned from that is we always need whole of society approaches to make civil registration really universal and effective. So I think that's the second takeaway. And the last takeaway, again, also a combination of all the presentations from the Philippines, affected populations need a place at the table. They are agents themselves. They are not only addressees of government and civil society measures, but they really need to actively participate. Of course, others can contribute to raise awareness, but it's really also up to them to make things happen, and they're ready and willing and able to do so with our support. So that was, for me, the key takeaways from the sessions, and I'll thank everybody again very much and hand the floor back over to Bangkok. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all speakers, and thank you all participants who joined us today. So I would like to conclude our warm-up session. Thank you so much.